When I was a kid, Christmas Day, December 25th, was the day we opened our presents. Christmas Eve was the night before Christmas. Christmas was Christmas Day. And that surprises me because I was brought up in Miami. Now you're thinking that surprises me because we didn't have snow in Miami. That's not it. Miami, well, all of my friends as I was growing up in my neighborhood either went to the Lutheran church with me or they went to synagogue. My friends were Jewish or Lutheran. That's what they were. Miami Beach at that time had more Jewish people than anywhere in the world except New York City and Tel Aviv. And this is why it surprises me. You see, the Jewish way of counting time starts at sundown, right? So if Jesus was born while the shepherds were keeping watch over their flocks by night, then he must have been born somewhere between sundown on the 24th and sunup on the 25th, because for a Jewish person, the day started at sundown. So to think that Jesus was born on what we call December 25th has to include those hours between 6 in the evening and midnight, or else you're really not thinking like a Jewish person. And I bring this up because if you think about it, Easter has the same thing going on here. Sun's gone down, hasn't it? Right? I can break my Lenten fast now. I can eat sweets because it's Easter. Now, here's the caveat in there. We do have this very important punctuation mark at sunrise. What we know is that sometime between sundown on what we would call Saturday and sunrise on what we would call Sunday, Jesus rose from the dead. After sunrise is when people found out that Jesus rose from the dead. Okay? So the announcement by the angels occurs when the women come to the tomb. They find the angels there, they find the stone rolled away. It's that announcement time is the proclamation of Jesus' resurrection. But as Christians, knowing the story and trying to celebrate these things in this annual anniversary kind of thing, we know that any minute now, it's exactly to the year, however many years it is, just not quite 2,000 since the moment when Jesus came back to life in the tomb. So our Easter Vigil service is not really cheating on Easter. It's just recognizing that we have these things, this sequence of events. So in my mind, what we're doing tonight is we are celebrating the fact of the resurrection. When we get to sunrise, we're going to celebrate the announcement of the angels that just left everybody trembling and astonished, right? That's what Mark tells us. And then with the festival services at 8 and 10:30, we are celebrating the whole thing come together. So if we're trying to make this Holy Week kind of mark each moment in time, what we're doing right now is we're saying, nobody else in the world knows it yet, but Jesus is alive. He is alive. He was dead, and now he is alive. The ancient church used this time then to try to adjust to that idea. they read these readings. You listened to the readings, and I hope that in your mind you were like, okay, why these particular readings? Well, for one thing, this is a kind of best of the Bible, right? You know, the creation, the flood, the Red Sea, you know, Jonah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the valley of dry bones, all of that stuff. This is kind of a best of the Bible. They're long readings because, as we mentioned before, they didn't have any problem with time. They were staying all night anyways. But there's also this theme that flows through it. This theme of a new life for people that have been delivered by God. Now, of course, the Genesis 1 reading, it's just new life, period, because nothing had happened before that. If they were delivered from something, it was from not existing. But after that, we've got these deliverance things. We've got Noah. The Bible is very clear that Noah was just frustrated and struggling to be seeking to live a righteous life among such terrible people that God said they all have to die. And then God instructed him to build the ark, and through the ark, God lifted Noah with the same water that destroyed the wicked. So Noah is saved, as we talk about all the time in our baptismal service, saved by the water. The ark didn't save Noah from the water. The water saved Noah from that miserable generation there. And then our reading is really geared not so much to the building of the ark and not so much to the tumult on the water, but to that dove going out and that sprig, that newly minted olive leaf that says, now the earth will have life again. Then we get to the Red Sea, and there we don't have the story so much of the everything leading up to it. We just have the Israelites walking across on dry land, the destruction of Pharaoh's army, the recognition of the Israelites that Pharaoh and his armies will never have anything to do with their lives again. They are finally delivered. And everything after the Red Sea is a new life. When we move from those stories into our other stories, Jonah brings this theme of repentance that, in our first two stories, the bad people die and the good people are delivered from them. But now God, because he likes to turn things so upside down, says, how about if the bad people are delivered from their own sins? And we get that story in Jonah. Ezekiel has this marvelous story of the power of this new life. Those bones were brittle, dry, dusty, and disjointed, so that when they came together, there's this rattling sound. We read a book with our kids in the car many years ago. Can't remember the name of it, but we just had a blast. And in this book, there's a gunshot that spooks this kid that's trying to play a prank, or maybe it's, I can't remember. Maybe there's two kids in there. Anyway, and the line is. What we always thought the line was I'm dead. I'm really dead. It turns out that the line is actually just, I'm dead. Oh, I'm dead. Just frightened to death, he thought, by what had happened there, thinking that he was shot in that dark kitchen, but that I'm dead. Oh, I'm dead. in our sin, we're really dead. And God gathers up those dusty, dry bones, and he brings them together, and he joins them back, and there's this kind of, in my imagination, God is like constructing a human being, or a bunch of human beings, joining bone to bone. Then he puts ligaments to hold those joints together. Then he attaches muscles, and the muscles that attach to the bones. Then he covers it with flesh, and then finally his Spirit breathes life. There's this marvelous picture of how dead, St. Paul says we were dead in our transgressions and sins. God has made us alive. And then we get to that wonderful story with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in there, with all of the repetition that's built in there that is one of the reasons that kids really like this story, where the rescue now very obviously involves the 3 Hebrew children and person number 4, who looks like a son of the gods, who is in there in the fire with them, delivers them, saves them. So now, as we listen to these readings, and each year when you're at the Easter Vigil service, the first 3 readings are always those 3 readings, and then the other 3 rotate through a cycle, but always there's this theme then of deliverance into a new life on the other side. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, like the rest of these stories, there was this sentence of death pronounced on them. They were persecuted for their faith, and when they come out of the fire, their faith is recognized as the one true faith, a God who really rescues. So we listen to these stories at the Easter Vigil service to help us make this transition. We know the story of the resurrection from little on, and so it's like, oh, it's time for Jesus to come alive again. That's not how it started out. Jesus had been crucified by the Romans, and his loved ones had witnessed that crucifixion. They not only knew that the Romans were really good at killing people, but they saw them kill Jesus, and they knew that he was dead, dry bones, right? The last thing they expected, despite all Jesus had said, was that they would find the grave empty and that Jesus would come and speak to them in the flesh again. This night, and the sunrise service to some extent, but especially this night, is designed to help us go through that whole thing, where we forget as we come in that Jesus could possibly rise from the dead. And we let these stories tell us of how God miraculously does deliver his people into a new life. And as we listen to these stories, they set the scene, and they build the possibility into this. I would even argue that the whole Old Testament, all of the experiences of the people of God from Adam onward, God is very slowly building the case that it could happen, finally, that someone would rise from the dead, that God would care enough about his people to send his only Son into the world, and that Son would die with the sins of the world and rise from the dead. It took thousands of years. On Maundy Thursday we talked about it took 1,500 years to get our meal ready. It took thousands more to get people to this point where there was even the possibility that they could conceive of, that it would fit into any kind of context at all, that Jesus would rise from the dead. So that's what we're reliving right now, is this astonishment that this is even possible. And then here's this little group in a darkened church saying, wow, have we got a story to tell? That's what's going on here. And I pray that it will help move you from one place to the other, so that when we go out from here, we're ready for the next thing at sunrise and the next thing at the festival services. God grant it for Jesus' sake. Amen.